52 episodes, 52 ordinary people, 52 real stories about things that affect overall health. Because there is a lot more that goes into being healthy than food and fitness. Inspiration, support, a new perspective, and knowledge. You'll find that and more here on the Healthability Project.
Hi, welcome to the Healthability Project. I'm Robin McKenna. Imagine, as an adult, being in a country where you can't form friendships with neighbors or coworkers because you don't know the language well enough. Imagine not being able to communicate with a doctor when you, your kids, or your parents are sick. The ability to communicate, which also allows us to connect with others, has a profound effect on our overall health and well-being. Now imagine the people that teach adults English. How do you think giving people the ability to communicate affects their health and well-being? Sure, there are the ups and downs that go along with being a teacher. Add in that these teachers are also providing a tool that will unlock a better existence for those adults and their families, and that these teachers are witness to how that tool begins to impact their students and their families. Here to share her story of how teaching English as a second language to adults affected her overall health and well-being is Danielle Gines. Danielle taught English as a second language for adult immigrant and refugee populations in the North Texas area for almost a decade. In 2019, she had the opportunity to spend 4 months in Cambodia teaching in a female empowerment program through the Harpswell Foundation. Since then, she has combined her master's in nonprofit management and classroom experiences to build a curriculum consultancy for non-governmental organizations, also known as NGOs, and domestic nonprofits looking to create relevant and sustainable program curricula. Thanks so much for joining us today, Danielle. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you, Robin. I'm excited.
So we all know that what we do for a living influences our health and well-being. And what I find so unique about what Danielle has done in her career is that not only did it affect her overall health and well-being, it influenced the health and well-being of those she worked with. Danielle is an ESL teacher, and she has worked for many years with adults and teaching them English as a second language. And, listeners, for those of you who are American or speak English fluently, imagine coming to this country and having very little command of the language you need to have in order to live your life. And, what Danielle has done is just extraordinary. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Danielle. I'm curious to hear what drew you to becoming a teacher of English as a second language, and obviously how it affected your health and well-being, the ups, the downs. Like any teacher, I'm sure there are frustrations, but working with adults and trying to teach them a new language must have its own set of joys and frustrations. And then, would also like to hear how you saw the transformation evolve with these individuals who were gaining command of the English language. So thanks again.
Thank you. I love that introduction. So how I got started it's always a funny story, and even my students would laugh because the international community would often call me teacher. And so it's always funny in the United States, it's like Miss or, so they would be like, teacher, you always wanted to be a teacher. And the truth is I've lived a life of nevers. Everyone in my family is involved in education in some way. And so in 2009, I'd returned from a year of working on farms in Australia, real random life. And I needed a job, and it was a recession. And my mom said, you have a bachelor's in English. You should teach English as a second language. There's an opening at the community college. And I was like, no, I don't want to be like everyone in this family. but I needed a job. So I know, right? Never say never, truly.
Yeah.
And so I went to speak to the director, and she said, let's start you with one class. You'll be a co-teacher. And then to make it even more interesting, my mom taught in the same department, and she was the most senior teacher. So she was my co-teacher mentor.
Oh, wow. That must have made for an interesting dynamic.
It was. I called her the Colonel, if that tells you anything. So she was co-teaching me or we were co-teaching, and she was mentoring me in the morning. And then in the evening, I had a solo class. And so that was kind of the moment where I led everything. And I remember to this day, 2009, and I still remember everything so clearly, walking in. And it was like a temporary building because the school, the population where I live in Southeast Arlington, we have a very large international population. And so they had temporary buildings because the college couldn't build fast enough for all the students who were attending. And there were 3 rows of students, and they were all older than me. And they looked kind of like, you're my teacher, you could be my daughter. And I remember thinking, all right, like, be professional. And I wrote my name on the board, Ms. Gines, and the date and the homework. And I turned around, and there was something in their eyes. Like, when they saw that, they're like, okay, she is our teacher. And I felt like, from head to toe, Robin, I felt this click that I realized this is where I need to be. We focus so much on, what I want and my future life and, mood boards and vision boards. But where do you need to be? And that's usually going to intersect with people, right? Where you can benefit people. And for me, it's been teaching and education. And it was a level 1 beginner class. So, they were just a step above, how are you? My name is. And it was just amazing. Their trust, they opened their books. Everything I wrote down, they wrote down. It was really, really incredible.
It's interesting that you say where you need to be, and it's so true. We focus so much on what we want and where we want to be, and we have really ignored need, in the sense that where can you deploy what you have to give to others?
Exactly.
And so that is just fascinating that you really clicked on that the very first day of your first solo class.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like with the people in the class, as far as, was it a mixture of men and women? What was their ethnic background? Did they share any stories with you, where they came from, how they were settling in Texas or in the country?
Yeah. So when I first started, and that was the most amazing thing to see, is in 2009, there was just the beginning of refugee resettlement from Iraq and Afghanistan. And then, so I had, of course, it's Texas, so we had a lot of immigrants from Mexico. And then we started to see the increase from Iraq, Afghanistan. And then, by the time, I would say after my 10-year mark, like 2019, you would have 5 to 6 languages in a classroom, but then you would have maybe 10 cultures. So the Spanish-speaking cultures, an increase in South Americans and Central Americans, especially Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Honduras. And then we have a huge influx with Southeast Asia, India, and Vietnam, particularly. And, there's, in our curriculum, we would have, it was holistic, which I am a big advocate for. I don't think you should separate, today is only grammar. You really need to have a thread, which has increased my life philosophy, because everything is connected, right? You need to know why, especially as an adult learner, you need to know why something is relevant to you, because everything is impacted economically. What is this going to do for me, my family, our future, what our needs are? So we would have everything all at once in one day, one lesson, and then connected to, how do we write that? Or how would we have that, vocabulary in a conversation? And and reading and writing No student likes it. I think even American students don't like reading and writing, but that's where a lot of revelations happen, where your brain kind of gets to slow down and you process what's going on. And so a large part, something that I think a lot of ESL teachers or instructors or educators, whichever you prefer to call them, they don't realize is you need to also know things like culture shock, because you could have a student come in and be so angry and you're like, what is going on? Like, what happened in your day? And it's not what happened in your day, it's what's happening in your life. Imagine starting from scratch. Your degree is defunct. You're struggling in a language. Your brain is at an adult level, and you open your mouth and you feel like a 12-year-old, you know? Your children have to translate, and that's very, very sometimes humbling to the point where it can feel humiliating.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the level of stress and pressure on these adults, you know, most of them are not here alone, right? They've brought families, or maybe they've arrived with the expectation that they are going to be the support of the family that's already here and really contribute. And, you know, I think also too, as an adult, we, you know, there is that extra level of expectation we place on ourselves. And so sometimes it makes maybe a little bit harder to learn. When you started and you knew that you needed to be there, did you, I mean, over the course of time, you must have said to yourself, yeah, I'm really glad I did this, or did you expect the impact that it had on you? Did you expect that that is what would happen?
That's a great question. I never, you know, I started teaching because I needed a job. And in fact, I'll share this story with you. It was our most advanced levels, and it was probably a couple of years into when I was teaching. The kind of like the culmination, like we created this little like final exam, quote unquote, was to read a book in English, a chapter book, you know, and then and it could be of their choice. It couldn't be Dora or Clifford or anything, but something that would, you know, push them a little. And again, this was our most advanced level. And so they had to read the book, write a report, and then give a 10-minute presentation. And so it was just kind of getting all the different language skills. And a student, and again, clear as day, I can still see him wearing gray polo, tucked in, black belt, black pants. And he gave a report about a book called A Frindle, and I'd never read it. It's like a 5th, 6th grade level book. And so he finished it. He gave the report. It was great. And then the next week he came back to class and he's like, teacher, I have to tell you something. And I'm like, sure, what is it? He's like, you know, that book report. And any teacher knows that anytime a student says, I have to tell you something, you kind of hold your breath like, oh boy, what's going to happen? And he goes, so in my job, so he was a truck driver. He goes, I've been in my job, you know, 10, 15 years. And every week there's a meeting and they call us in and they, you know, our manager tries very hard to get our input as truck drivers, but a lot of us struggle with English. So we can pass the exam, but, you know, to drive the truck and of course get a license. But that kind of back and forth and giving feedback for the company, you know, they didn't feel comfortable. And he goes, I raised my hand and I said, you know, we've been having this problem consistently on the road. I think this would be a good solution. And he goes, oh, you know, my supervisor, he turned around and says, Hector, I didn't know you could speak English. And
Wow.
I was just in shock because I thought I saw it on his face. He went from invisible to out in the ocean, you know, or ocean, out in the center stage, just out like you could see there was no going back for him. And he goes, teacher, I thought, Hector, you gave a presentation in English. You can say 2 sentences to your supervisor. And just know that moment right there, like the things we do in class just ripple in ways that I never imagined.
How did that make you feel when he shared that story with you and you saw that he went from being invisible to highly visible?
first of all, I was so proud because to me, and that was the thing, like, you see people in any industry, you see a lens, right? You see them through, okay, you're my student. I see you interact every day. I see how smart you are. He was my smartest student. His English was so good. His understanding of nuances and culture. And I was shocked that he had tucked himself away in his workplace. And yet that a book report, stuff that we probably roll our eyes at in grade school, that promoted him to like that mental flip of, I'm never going back.
Right.
Like, I know this language, I'm claiming being bilingual, and I'm going to live in every sense of the word. And I was fighting back tears, and he's like, you okay? And I was like, yeah. That's amazing. I'm so proud of you. I'm like, oh my gosh, get it together.
Well, it's the gift of language, right? And these people come here searching for a better way of life for the most part. And the key to that is being able to communicate. You can become a better neighbor when you can communicate. Mm-hmm. You have a better connection with your children's teachers. You can call for help. You can explain sickness to people. So it sounds like that class for that person in particular was so empowering, but also such a confidence booster. And, I'm sure these are not things that you were thinking about when you went in to teach, that you were going to give people confidence or give them this level of empowerment to improve their lives. And so to be able to see that must have really made it all worth it.
Yeah. You just hit the nail on the head. I mean, when we were, doing professional development, or we never talk about the impact of the human side. It was always, make sure you're meeting your metrics and make sure that you're getting through your curriculum. But there's so much more to that. You really do have to embrace the human element. And teaching international students, it makes it even more challenging sometimes, because I found myself studying about cultures, outside of the class, and learning history. There are some cultures that they conflict and they remember. I mean, I had a Cambodian student and a Vietnamese student, and they were young. They weren't around during the genocide or any of the, the wars back, starting in the 60s and 70s. But their families, had told them. And so, I mean, my Cambodian student looked over and says, look, let's not talk history right now. Okay. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I need to learn about this. And so I can facilitate better, because they're not going to learn if they don't feel safe. And a lot of language, instruction is partner and group work. So yeah, you have to pick up a lot of extra things along the way.
You mentioned earlier about things, the way that you teach the technical side, needing for it to be relatable, and the diversity of culture and ethnicity in the individual classroom, which is interesting because there's such a commonality, though, of all these very different individuals who come because they're all there for the same reason. And it must be unifying in a way, or, did it help them collaborate better, or did they drop their guard? You mentioned the Vietnamese and the Cambodian students. I would assume there are some cultures where, men and women should be separate. And, just watching that unfold over the course of 10 years, I mean, it must have been eye-opening.
It really, really was. And it's like, we don't realize that our cultures have personalities. We think, especially as Americans, we have an individualistic culture, but we do have a group culture. And so one of the things I started early on realizing, we do need to unify. We need to touch base on our goals. And so I would have, even though it was the first day, just 5 points on the board, introduce yourself to the class. And the last point was always, I want to learn English because, and depending on the level, I would leave it open-ended. If it were an advanced class, they could come up with their own reasons. If it were a lower level class, in terms of language development, I would write down a lot of the common things like you talked about, want to talk to my neighbors. I want to get a better job. I want to talk to my children's teacher. I want to feel good when I talk to the doctor. I want to understand. And, they could copy answers or add their own. So that throughout our time together, it was always like, remember, she also wants to talk to her children's teacher. Is there any advice you want to share about that? And just kind of rerouting any friction. But definitely with some of the Middle Eastern cultures, I had to be more careful with female and male because, you want to respect their culture. And I saw it firsthand, where especially if they came as a couple, husband and wife, that always got very interesting and problematic because they felt like, all right, I guess we'll always be a partner team. And I would, say, oh, well, Halima, would you like to work with Monica today? Her partner is absent. And, believe it or not, the wife would always be so excited to have a different partner. But it would, if you can imagine, but of course it had to be female. So I knew that. Right. And I was like, we're just going to make this work.
And how was the husband okay with that?
If the husband, if I partnered him, of course, with another male student, and that was another thing, it was always like, oh, well, now I can talk to someone who hasn't heard my stories. Right. So, yeah.
You were creating friendships and relationships within the parameter of the technical reason for being there.
Exactly. Yeah. A huge sign of success for me was when I would see students after class, look for each other on Facebook or exchange numbers. Or there was one group I remember they had all the assignments done early. And I thought, oh, wow, like 5 of you? That was very ambitious. And 5 of you, 1 or 2. And they're like, yes, teacher, we got together for coffee down the street. So they went outside of their little enclave in the neighborhood. Wow. And got together and then did the assignments ahead of time. I was like, my work is done. I can retire. And they loved it when I would say that, like, my work is done. I'm going to take my badge off. My work is done. And they'd be like, oh my gosh, teacher, your work is done.
Was there ever a point where you became so frustrated, whatever the reason may be, whether it was the bureaucracy of the school or just the clash of cultures or students not doing their homework, that you thought, that's it, I'm quitting, this is not for me? And how did you get past that?
Yes. Oh, it's a great question. And especially now, because educators are feeling so crunched, so unsupported. And unfortunately, and because I was in higher ed and it was a community college, but still there was that bureaucracy where changes were being made to the curriculum, changes were being made to the schedule, changes were being made to the standard as who would become ESL teachers. Yes. And not once were current staff or students were they asked any supporting questions. And that was probably the biggest frustration is when it comes, these are students that have gone through a lot of change. Right. And I always think of it like being in a washing machine. You're tumbling around, you're trying to find your footing to get right side up. And for some, it's amazing. They hit their stride very early. And for others, it takes time. And so any opportunity you have to produce stability, right? And that's when it comes to teaching, if you can consistency, I think that's my biggest lesson is, even for myself, like during the pandemic, it was go back to my teacher habits, what's my routine? What can I control? Time management, all of that comes from my time in the classroom because that gave my students comfort in, I know it's coming next. I don't know what's happening when I leave this room, but I know it's coming next. And so to have an institution create more turmoil than stability it was really hard because then you're the messenger and students look at you like, why? So, oh my goodness. Yeah.
And so what would you say to yourself when you would get to those dark points of wanting
it's hard. And I'm sure a lot of teachers can agree, or anyone who's in the service and, type industries, when you see your impact, especially direct impact, those light bulbs that come on, it does keep you going. But I think a lot of change what you can change, and don't just be quiet about it. I would try to, I remember sending emails to my director and being like, there's a reason that I'm upset about this, and this is why, and just being able to explain it, even if they don't go, and they didn't always or never go with my suggestions, I at least could look my students in the eye and say, I advocated for you, so yeah, wow. I tried.
Wow. So you took a job because you needed a job, like so many of us do, and it turned in to be so exponentially more, not only for yourself, but for the students that you had. It's an amazingly beautiful story.
Oh, thank you. I feel very humbled to have had that impact, truly.
And so what are you doing now? I know that you've moved on from English as a second language, teaching it, and you've moved on to building curriculum.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So in 2019, I went to Cambodia for 4 months and worked with a nonprofit that had an education program. And so it worked with first generation female students. And I was teaching their curriculum, and it wasn't as ESL friendly. And so I thought, well, let me shoot my shot, as the kids say. And the director said, sure, we'll hire you to be our curriculum consultant, and you can make improvements. And so I would work with the local Khmer staff. We were all, of course, Zoom, and just getting things that are just going back to my ESL teaching days, and the empathy that came from those years, and just still really connecting with, these are forever lessons for me. So I bring that into my curriculum. I specifically work with nonprofits, whether they have an international audience or not. I've realized having that background in ESL, it's been critical. We all want to be understood. We all want to know why we're here and how this is going to impact us. So yeah.
Wow. What a great story. Thank you so much for being here today. This was one of my favorite conversations, I think, so far.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Robin. I have very, very fond memories of ESL. And I don't think, I still have pictures. Oh my gosh, we could probably spend hours, but we'll keep it short.
Yeah, great.
So thank you.
Alrighty, listeners, hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like us, share with your friends, and let everybody know about the Health Ability Project podcast. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email me at thehealthabilityproject@gmail.com. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us today at the Health Ability Project. We'd love to hear from you, so please email us your questions, comments, or suggestions, including future guests, to thehealthabilityproject@gmail.com. And please like us, subscribe, and share us with your friends.